The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Rose's Diner, a small family restaurant that had served the community of Millbrook for over 30 years. The chrome and red vinyl interior hadn't changed much since the 1980s, and neither had the loyal customers who gathered there every morning for coffee and conversation. Marcus Thompson wheeled his chair through the entrance, the familiar chime of the doorbell announcing his arrival. At 32, Marcus had learned to navigate the world with quiet determination despite the spinal injury that had changed his life 8 years ago. What most people didn't know was that the modest man in the wheelchair was worth more than the entire town's annual budget combined. His tech company, Adaptive Solutions, had revolutionized accessibility software and made him incredibly wealthy, but Marcus preferred to keep that information private. He chose his usual table near the window, where he could watch the morning traffic and enjoy his breakfast in peace. The diner was busier than usual today, filled with construction workers from a nearby job site. Marcus noticed them immediately, 5 men in their 20s and 30s, their voices loud and their laughter aggressive as they occupied the large corner booth. Sarah Martinez, the morning waitress, approached Marcus with a warm smile. She had been working at Rose's for 6 years and had always treated every customer with kindness and respect. "Good morning, Marcus. The usual today?" "That sounds perfect, Sarah." "Thank you." Marcus appreciated how she never made a big deal about his wheelchair or spoke to him any differently than other customers. It was a small gesture that meant more than she probably realized. As Sarah headed to the kitchen, Marcus pulled out his tablet and began reviewing some documents for his company. Adaptive Solutions was launching a new initiative to provide free accessibility software to schools nationwide, a project that was close to his heart. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice the construction workers' conversation growing louder until their words became impossible to ignore. "Look at that guy over there," said Jake Morrison, the apparent leader of the group. He was a stocky man with calloused hands and a permanent sneer that made him look older than his 28 years. Taking up a whole table just for himself. "Don't these people have special places they are supposed to eat?" His companions laughed, encouraging him to continue. Tommy Pierce, a thin man with nervous energy, chimed in, maybe he's waiting for someone to cut his food for him. The comment drew more laughter from the group, and their voices grew even louder. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his eyes on his tablet. He had dealt with ignorant people before, and he knew the best response was usually no response at all. But as their comments became more pointed and cruel, other diners began to notice the uncomfortable atmosphere developing in the restaurant. Elena Rodriguez had been cleaning tables near the back of the diner when she heard the commotion. At 55, Elena had worked as a cleaning lady for most of her adult life, supporting her 3 children after her husband's death 12 years ago. She was a small woman with graying hair and gentle hands that showed the wear of decades of hard work. What the construction workers didn't know was that Elena had a secret that would shock everyone in that diner. "Hey, wheelchair guy!" Jake called out suddenly, causing the entire restaurant to fall silent. "You know this is a family restaurant, right? Maybe you should find somewhere more suitable for your condition." Marcus looked up from his tablet, his face calm but his eyes showing the hurt that such words always caused. "I'm just trying to have breakfast like everyone else," he said quietly. "Well, you're making people uncomfortable," Jake continued, his friends nodding in agreement. "Kids might see you and get scared. Maybe you should consider takeout next time." Sarah had emerged from the kitchen with Marcus's order, and she stood frozen, unsure of how to handle the situation. The other diners watched in uncomfortable silence, most of them looking down at their plates, unwilling to get involved. Elena finished wiping down the table she was cleaning and slowly walked toward the front of the restaurant. Her heart was pounding, but years of watching people be cruel to those they perceived as different had taught her that silence was often the same as approval. She had spent too many years being quiet when she should have spoken up. "Excuse me," Elena said in her soft voice, addressing the table of construction workers. "But this gentleman has every right to eat here just like anyone else." Jake turned to look at Elena, taking in her worn uniform and tired appearance. "Oh great, now the help is getting involved. Lady, this is none of your business." Go back to scrubbing toilets or whatever it is you do." The cruelty in his voice made several diners gasp, and Elena felt her face flush with embarrassment. But she didn't back down. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect," she said firmly. "Respect?" Tommy laughed. "From a cleaning lady? That's rich. How about you both just stay in your lane and let normal people enjoy their meal?" Marcus watched Elena stand up for him, this woman he had never spoken to but who worked quietly in the background every time he visited the diner. He felt a mixture of gratitude and shame that someone else was fighting a battle that had become too familiar in his own life. "Listen, lady," Jake said, standing up from his seat. At 6 feet tall, he towered over Elena's small frame. "Nobody asked for your opinion.
Now!
Why don't you go back to whatever minimum wage job you're supposed to be doing and let us finish our conversation?" But Elena didn't move. Something in her posture had changed, a subtle straightening of her spine that suggested there was more to this quiet cleaning lady than met the eye. "I've been watching people like you my whole life," she said, her voice growing stronger. "People who think being cruel makes them powerful. But you're wrong." The tension in the diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Sarah stood behind the counter, unsure whether to call the police or her manager. The construction workers seemed to be enjoying the attention, feeding off the discomfort they were creating. Marcus made a decision. He powered up his wheelchair and began to move toward the exit. "It's okay, Elena. I'll just go somewhere else." "No," Elena said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "You shouldn't have to leave. You were here first, and you're doing nothing wrong." Jake laughed mockingly. "Oh, this is perfect." The cripple and the cleaning lady, standing up to the big bad construction workers. "What are you going to do? Call your manager?" What happened next would be talked about in Millbrook for years to come. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, but instead of calling the restaurant manager or the police, she dialed a number that very few people had access to. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Rodriguez Law Firm, this is Jennifer speaking." "Jennifer, this is Elena. I need you to patch me through to Michael immediately. Tell him it's urgent." The construction workers continued their taunts, unaware that their world was about to change completely. Jake was in the middle of making another cruel joke when Elena's phone rang back. "Mom?" The voice on the other end was concerned and professional. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Elena looked directly at Jake as she spoke. "I'm fine, sweetheart. But I'm at the diner, and there are some men here who seem to think they can bully people because of their disabilities or their jobs. I think they might benefit from meeting you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'll be right there. Don't let anyone make you feel small, Mom. You raised me better than to let that happen." As Elena hung up the phone, she noticed that Marcus was still sitting at his table, having decided not to leave after all. Something about her phone conversation had intrigued him, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Jake was growing impatient with the delay. "Are you done with your little phone call? Because we're trying to eat here, and your drama is ruining our appetite." "My son will be here in a few minutes," Elena said calmly. "He's very interested in meeting people who think being cruel is acceptable behavior." Tommy snorted with laughter. "Oh no, guys. The cleaning lady is calling her son." I'm shaking in my boots. "What's he going to do, come here and clean our table?" The other construction workers found this hilarious, their laughter echoing through the now silent diner. But Elena just smiled, a mysterious expression that made Marcus wonder exactly who this quiet woman really was. Outside, the sound of expensive car engines could be heard pulling into the parking lot. Elena glanced out the window and nodded with satisfaction. "He's here," she announced. The diner door chimed again, but this time it wasn't the gentle ring that had announced Marcus's arrival. This time, 3 men in expensive suits walked through the entrance, their presence immediately commanding attention. The tallest of the 3, A man in his early 30s with Elena's same dark eyes, scanned the room until he spotted her. "Mom," he said, walking directly to where she stood. "Are you all right?" Elena nodded toward the table of construction workers, who were suddenly looking much less confident than they had moments before. These gentlemen seem to think they can treat people however they want because they assume they're better than everyone else. Michael Rodriguez, one of the most successful lawyers in the state, turned his attention to Jake and his companions. Behind him, two associates flanked him like bodyguards, their briefcases suggesting they were prepared for business. "Gentlemen," Michael said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "I understand you've been having some difficulty with basic human decency this morning." Jake's confidence was evaporating quickly, but he tried to maintain his aggressive posture. "Look, we don't want any trouble. We were just having breakfast." "Interesting," Michael replied, pulling out his phone and showing them a screen. "Because I've been recording this entire conversation through my mother's phone. Would you like me to play back your comments about disabled people and minimum wage workers?" The color drained from Tommy's face as the reality of their situation began to sink in. These weren't just random people who had walked into the diner. This was clearly a family with resources and connections that the construction workers had never imagined. The atmosphere in Rose's diner had shifted dramatically in the span of just a few minutes. Jake Morrison and his crew, who had been so confident and cruel just moments before, now found themselves facing a situation they were completely unprepared for. Michael Rodriguez stood between his mother and the construction workers, his presence commanding respect in a way that had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with earned authority. "I'm waiting," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "My mother told me that you had some very interesting opinions about people with disabilities and people who work service jobs. I'd like to hear those opinions repeated." Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he looked around the diner, suddenly aware that every person in the restaurant was staring at him. The confident bully from 10 minutes ago had been replaced by a nervous man who was beginning to understand that actions have consequences. "Look, man, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jake stammered. "We were just joking around. Nobody meant any harm." Elena stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "You told this gentleman that he shouldn't eat in public because children might be scared of him. You told me to go back to scrubbing toilets. Were those jokes?" Marcus watched the exchange with a mixture of amazement and growing respect for Elena. In all his years of dealing with discrimination and ignorance, very few people had ever stood up for him the way this woman had. Most people looked away, uncomfortable with confrontation, or offered sympathy after the fact. But Elena had put herself directly in harm's way to defend a stranger. "I want to know who you work for," Michael said, addressing Jake directly. "Because I'm very interested in speaking with your employer about the kind of people they send to represent their company in public." Tommy Pierce, who had been trying to make himself invisible in the corner of the booth, spoke up nervously. "We work for Morrison Construction. Jake's dad owns the company." Jake shot Tommy a murderous look, but the damage was done. Michael pulled out his phone and began typing. "Morrison Construction. Thank you. I'll make sure to have a conversation with them about their employee conduct policies." "Wait," Jake said, panic beginning to creep into his voice. "You can't do that. My dad, the company, look, maybe I got a little out of line, but it's not worth destroying people's livelihoods over." Michael looked at his mother, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "You're right about one thing," Michael said. "Livelihoods shouldn't be destroyed lightly. But they should definitely be examined when people use their positions to hurt others." Sarah, who had been standing behind the counter throughout the entire confrontation, finally found her voice. "I can testify to everything that happened," she said. "I've been working here for 6 years, and I've never seen anyone treated the way these men treated Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Rodriguez." It was the first time Marcus had heard Elena's last name, and suddenly, several pieces of a puzzle began clicking into place in his mind. Rodriguez law firm was one of the most prestigious legal practices in the region, known for taking on civil rights cases and fighting for the underrepresented. If Elena was related to that family, then she was far from the simple cleaning lady that the construction workers had assumed her to be. Elena walked over to Marcus's table and sat down across from him. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," she said quietly. "No one should have to deal with ignorance like that." Marcus studied her face, seeing strength and intelligence that had been there all along but that he had never really noticed before. "Thank you," he said simply. "You didn't have to get involved, but you did. That means more than you know." "Actually," Elena said with a small smile, "I think I know exactly how much it means. I've been watching you come to this diner for months. You're always polite, always kind to Sarah and the other staff, and you never make a fuss about anything. When those men started attacking you, they were attacking everything I believe in about how people should treat each other." Michael approached their table, his phone still in his hand. "Mom, I've made some calls. Morrison Construction has several contracts with the city, and I think the mayor might be very interested in knowing about their employees' behavior toward disabled citizens." Jake overheard this and stood up abruptly. "You can't do this. We said we were sorry." "No," Elena corrected him firmly. "You said there was a misunderstanding. You said you were joking. You never actually apologized for your behavior or acknowledged that what you did was wrong." Marcus found himself impressed by Elena's precise thinking. She wasn't just defending him out of emotion, she was making clear, logical points about accountability and genuine remorse. It was the kind of thinking that suggested she was far more educated and experienced than her job might suggest. "What do you want from us?" Jake asked, his voice now pleading rather than aggressive. Michael consulted his phone again. "I've been looking into Morrison Construction's history. It seems this isn't the first time employees have been reported for inappropriate behavior. There was an incident 6 months ago involving harassment of a female client, and another situation involving discrimination against Hispanic workers." The color drained completely from Jake's face. "How do you know about those things? Those reports were supposed to be confidential." "Nothing is confidential when it involves civil rights violations and patterns of discriminatory behavior," Michael explained. "My firm specializes in exactly these kinds of cases." Marcus was beginning to understand that this situation had evolved far beyond a simple confrontation in a diner. The construction workers had unknowingly picked a fight with people who had the knowledge, resources, and motivation to hold them accountable for their actions in ways they never could have imagined. Elena stood up from the table and walked to where her son was standing. "Michael, I want you to do something for me." "Anything, Mom." "I want you to investigate Morrison Construction thoroughly. Not just for what happened today, but for everything. If they have a pattern of discriminatory behavior, then other people have been hurt, and those people deserve justice." Jake's face went pale. "You can't be serious. We're talking about dozens of jobs here. People with families to support." Elena turned to look at him directly. "You should have thought about that before you decided to attack people who were different from you. Actions have consequences, Mr. Morrison." Marcus realized that Elena knew Jake's last name, which meant she had been paying closer attention to the entire situation than anyone had realized. She wasn't just a good Samaritan stepping in to help, she was someone with the intelligence and resources to follow through on her commitment to justice. "There's something else you should know," Elena said, addressing the construction workers directly. "I don't actually work as a cleaning lady because I have to. I volunteer here because I believe in supporting local businesses and staying connected to my community. My late husband left me very well provided for, and my son has been successful enough to ensure I never have to worry about money again." The revelation hit the diner like a thunderbolt. The woman they had mocked for her minimum wage job was actually volunteering her time to help others. The assumptions they had made about her social status and education were not just wrong, they were completely backwards. Tommy looked like he was going to be sick. "We didn't know," he whispered. "That's exactly the point," Elena replied. "You didn't know anything about me, just like you didn't know anything about Mr. Thompson. But you felt entitled to judge us and treat us badly based on what you assumed about us." Marcus found himself deeply moved by Elena's words. In his years of dealing with discrimination, he had rarely encountered someone who understood so clearly how prejudice worked and why it was so damaging. She wasn't just defending him, she was articulating principles that he wished more people understood. Michael had been quiet during his mother's explanation, but now he stepped forward again. "Gentlemen, here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize sincerely to both my mother and Mr. Thompson. You're going to pay for their meals today. And then, you're going to leave and think very carefully about how you treat people in the future." "And if we don't?" Jake asked, though his defiance sounded hollow. "Then, my firm will file discrimination lawsuits against you individually and against Morrison Construction as a company. We'll investigate every project your company has worked on for evidence of discriminatory practices. We'll contact the city council about reviewing all current contracts with your company. And we'll make sure that everyone in this community knows exactly how you treat disabled people and working families." The weight of Michael's words settled over the construction workers like a heavy blanket. They had started the morning thinking they were better than the people around them, and they were ending it facing the possibility of losing everything because of their cruelty. But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. As he watched Elena handle the situation with grace and intelligence, as he observed the respect her son showed her and the way she commanded attention without raising her voice, he realized that he had encountered someone truly remarkable. "Elena," he said suddenly, causing everyone to turn and look at him. "I owe you more than an apology can express. But I'd like to ask you something." She walked back to his table, curious about what he wanted to say. "Of course. Would you be willing to have lunch with me sometime? Not here, obviously, but somewhere we can talk without worrying about ignorant people interrupting us." Elena smiled, the first truly relaxed expression she had shown since the confrontation began. "I'd like that very much." Jake cleared his throat nervously. "Look, we'll pay for your meals and we'll leave. But, please, don't destroy our company over this. People make mistakes." The construction workers fumbled for their wallets, clearly eager to pay for the meals and escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Jake Morrison pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and placed it on Marcus's table, while Tommy did the same for Elena. The money lay there like evidence of their guilt, insufficient to undo the damage they had caused but representing their first acknowledgement that they had done something wrong. "Is that supposed to cover the emotional distress you caused?" Michael asked, his legal training evident in the way he framed the question. "Because I can assure you that what happened here today goes far beyond the cost of breakfast." Marcus looked at the money on his table and, then, at Elena, who was watching the scene with the careful attention of someone who had learned never to trust easy solutions to complex problems. He made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Keep your money," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't about payment. It's about understanding why what you did was wrong and making sure it doesn't happen again." Jake looked confused. "But, you said we had to pay for the meals." "My son said that," Elena corrected. "But, Mr. Thompson is right. Money doesn't fix the harm you caused. Education might, but only if you're willing to learn." Sarah approached the table hesitantly, carrying a fresh cup of coffee for Marcus and a glass of water for Elena. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have said something earlier. I should have asked them to leave as soon as they started making comments." Elena reached out and touched Sarah's hand gently. "You were put in an impossible situation. No one should have to choose between their job and standing up for what's right." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Sarah, you've always treated me with respect and kindness. That means more than you know. You shouldn't feel guilty about not wanting to escalate a situation that wasn't your fault to begin with." Michael had been listening to the conversation while keeping one eye on the construction workers, who seemed unsure whether they were free to leave or still trapped in the confrontation. "Actually," he said, "this raises an interesting point about workplace policies. Sarah, does this restaurant have clear guidelines about how to handle harassment of customers?" Sarah shook her head. "Not really. I mean, we're supposed to call the manager if there's trouble, but she doesn't come in until noon on weekdays. That's a problem, Michael observed. Service workers shouldn't be left to handle discrimination and harassment without proper training and support. Elena looked at her son with pride. Even in the middle of a tense confrontation, he was thinking about systemic issues and how to prevent future problems. Maybe that's something we can address, she said thoughtfully. Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by both Elena and her son. They weren't just reacting to the immediate situation, they were thinking about how to create lasting change. It reminded him of his own approach to business, where he tried to solve problems at their root rather than just treating symptoms. Before you leave, Marcus said to the construction workers, I want you to understand something. I have a spinal cord injury that happened in a car accident 8 years ago. Before that accident, I might have been just like you, making assumptions about people based on their appearance or circumstances. The difference is that I learned something from my experience that made me more compassionate, not more cruel. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm sorry about your accident, but you don't know anything about our lives either. We work hard, we pay our taxes, and we don't usually cause trouble. You're right, Marcus replied. I don't know about your lives. But I didn't attack you based on assumptions about who you are or what you deserve. You did that to me and to Elena. Elena stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Michael's expensive car sat next to the construction workers' pickup trucks. You know, she said, this whole situation reminds me of something my late husband used to say. He always told me that people reveal their true character when they think there are no consequences for their actions. What did your husband do? Tommy asked, the first time he had spoken directly to Elena rather than about her. He was a civil rights lawyer, like my son. He spent his career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Before he died, he made me promise to continue his work in whatever way I could. The revelation added another layer to the morning's events. Elena wasn't just a volunteer who had decided to help, she was someone with a lifetime of experience fighting injustice and discrimination. The construction workers had unknowingly attacked the widow of a man who had dedicated his life to exactly the kinds of civil rights violations they had just committed. Michael pulled out his phone and showed Jake the screen. I've been researching Morrison Construction while we've been talking. Your company has received over $2 million in city contracts over the past 3 years. That's taxpayer money, which means you're essentially public servants when you're on those jobs. Jake's face went even paler. What does that have to do with anything? It means that when you discriminate against disabled citizens while representing a company that receives public funds, you're violating federal civil rights laws in addition to basic human decency. Marcus realized that the situation had evolved far beyond a simple confrontation between bullies and their victims. The construction workers had stumbled into a legal and ethical minefield that they were completely unprepared to navigate. I need to call my dad, Jake said, reaching for his phone. That's probably a good idea, Michael agreed. He's going to want to know about this conversation before he hears about it from the city council. Elena turned back from the window, her expression thoughtful. Actually, before you make that call, I want to propose something. Everyone in the diner turned to look at her, curious about what she had in mind. Marcus found himself continually surprised by her strategic thinking and her ability to see opportunities for positive change even in negative situations. What if, instead of just punishing you for what happened today, we turned this into a learning experience that could prevent similar situations in the future? Jake looked suspicious. What kind of learning experience? Morrison Construction could implement a comprehensive sensitivity and diversity training program for all employees. You could become a model for how construction companies should treat all members of the community, including people with disabilities, women, minorities, and anyone else who might face discrimination. Michael looked at his mother with admiration. That's actually brilliant, Mom. Instead of just punitive action, we create systemic change that helps other people. Marcus found himself nodding in agreement. It's the same principle I use in my business. Instead of just fixing individual problems, we create solutions that prevent the problems from happening again. What kind of business are you in? Elena asked, genuinely curious. For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus smiled. I develop accessibility software. My company creates technology that helps people with disabilities navigate the digital world more easily. Elena's eyes lit up with interest. That's wonderful. My husband always said that the most important work was the work that helped other people live better lives. The conversation had taken a turn that none of the construction workers had expected. Instead of facing immediate punishment, they were being offered an opportunity to turn their mistake into something positive. It was more grace than they deserved, and they all knew it. But, Michael added, the training program would need to be real and comprehensive, not just a token gesture. And there would need to be clear consequences for any future incidents involving discrimination or harassment. Jake looked at his co-workers, who seemed relieved by the possibility of avoiding immediate consequences for their actions. How would something like that work? Elena pulled out her phone and began typing. I know several organizations that specialize in workplace diversity training. They could design a program specifically for construction companies, addressing the kinds of situations you deal with regularly. And, Marcus added, my company could provide information about accessibility requirements and how to interact respectfully with people who have disabilities. Sarah had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement. This is incredible, she said. You're turning something awful into something that could help a lot of people. That's what my husband taught me, Elena replied. He always said that the goal wasn't just to win individual battles, but to change the conditions that create those battles in the first place. Michael was taking notes on his phone. We would need legal agreements outlining the training requirements, regular assessments to ensure compliance, and clear protocols for handling any future incidents. The construction workers were beginning to understand that they were being offered something extraordinary, a chance to transform their mistake into an opportunity for growth and positive change. It was more than they had any right to expect, and it would require them to acknowledge their wrongdoing and commit to doing better in the future. Jake Morrison stared at his phone for a long moment before finally dialing his father's number. The weight of the conversation he was about to have pressed down on him like a physical burden. Around the diner, the other customers had gradually returned to their own conversations, but the tension in the air was still palpable. Dad? Jake's voice was smaller than it had been all morning. I need to tell you about something that happened at the diner. While Jake explained the situation to his father in hushed, urgent tones, Elena and Marcus found themselves in their own quiet conversation at his table. Sarah had brought Elena a cup of coffee, and the two of them were discussing Marcus's accessibility software company with genuine interest. How did you get into that field? Elena asked. Marcus traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger, a gesture that Elena noticed was more about nervous energy than actual interest in the beverage. After my accident, I realized how many barriers exist in the digital world for people with disabilities. Simple things that everyone else takes for granted become impossible obstacles. I figured if I was going to rebuild my life, I might as well use the experience to help other people rebuild theirs. Elena nodded thoughtfully. My husband always said that our worst experiences often prepare us for our most important work. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Elena replied softly. He also would have been very proud of what we accomplished here today. Not just standing up to bullies, but creating an opportunity for real change. Michael approached their table, having finished his own phone call. I've been in touch with the diversity training organizations Mom mentioned. 3 of them are interested in developing a program specifically for construction companies. They could have something ready to present within 2 weeks. Marcus looked up with interest. That's incredibly fast for program development. It helps that they are dealing with experienced professionals who understand both the legal requirements and the practical challenges, Michael explained. They've been waiting for an opportunity to expand into the construction industry. From across the diner, Jake's voice rose slightly as his conversation with his father became more animated. The other construction workers sat in uncomfortable silence, occasionally glancing at Elena and Marcus as if they were trying to figure out whether they were about to be saved or destroyed. Everything all right over there? Elena called out, her voice carrying just enough authority to remind Jake that his private conversation was taking place in a very public setting. Jake covered the phone with his hand. My dad wants to know if this training program thing is really an option, or if you're just playing with us. Elena exchanged a look with Michael, who nodded slightly. Tell your father that my son will email him a formal proposal within 24 hours. The training program is a real option, but it comes with real requirements and real consequences if those requirements aren't met. Jake relayed this information to his father, and, after a few more minutes of conversation, he hung up the phone. His expression was a mixture of relief and apprehension as he approached Elena and Marcus's table. My dad says he's interested in the training program, Jake announced. He also says he wants to apologize personally for what happened today. He didn't raise me to treat people the way I treated you. Elena studied Jake's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus simple fear of consequences. What do you think, Jake? Do you understand why what you did was wrong, or are you just sorry you got caught? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jake shifted uncomfortably under Elena's direct gaze. The other diners had grown quiet again, sensing that this was a crucial moment in the morning's drama. I think. Jake started, then stopped and started again. I think I've been angry about a lot of things in my life, and I've been taking that anger out on people who didn't deserve it. Today wasn't the first time, and if nothing had happened, it probably wouldn't have been the last time. It was the most honest thing Jake had said all morning, and Elena recognized the difficulty it had taken for him to admit it. What are you angry about? Jake looked at his co-workers, who were listening intently to every word. My dad built the construction company from nothing, and I've always felt like I could never measure up to what he accomplished. Instead of working harder to prove myself, I guess I've been trying to make myself feel better by putting other people down. Marcus found himself sympathizing with Jake's struggle, despite everything that had happened. I understand that feeling, he said quietly. Before my accident, I was angry about a lot of things too. I thought I was better than other people because of what I had accomplished. It took losing everything to teach me that success doesn't give anyone the right to treat others badly. You lost everything? Tommy asked, speaking up for the first time in several minutes. Not financially, Marcus clarified. But I lost my sense of who I was, my physical capabilities, my confidence. I had to rebuild my entire identity from scratch. Elena reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand gently. And look what you built from that experience. A company that helps other people, a life dedicated to making the world more accessible for everyone. The gesture was simple, but it carried an intimacy that suggested their connection was deeper than just two strangers who had defended each other in a diner confrontation. Marcus looked at Elena's hand on his and realized that something significant was happening between them. There's something else I need to tell you, Marcus said, addressing the entire group. Earlier, when you made comments about disabled people taking up space and making others uncomfortable, you were talking to someone who employs over 300 people and whose company is worth more than $50 million. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Jake's mouth fell open, and Tommy looked like he was going to faint. Even Michael and Elena seemed surprised by the magnitude of Marcus's success. Jake stammered. You're rich? Wealth isn't the point, Marcus replied firmly. The point is that your assumptions about me were completely wrong, just like your assumptions about Elena were wrong. You decided that I was someone who didn't deserve respect based on nothing but my disability. Elena squeezed Marcus's hand supportively. And even if he wasn't successful, even if he was struggling financially, he still would have deserved to eat his breakfast in peace. Michael pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Marcus, if you don't mind me asking, what's the name of your company? Adaptive Solutions. Why? Michael's eyes widened as he read something on his screen. I know your company. You provided the accessibility software for the new city website last year. My firm worked on the legal compliance review for that project. The morning's coincidences were beginning to feel less like random chance and more like destiny. Elena and Marcus had not only defended each other against ignorant bullies, but they were also discovering connections that went far beyond their initial meeting. "This is getting weird," Tommy muttered, voicing what everyone in the diner was thinking. "Not weird," Elena corrected. "Just proof that we live in a smaller world than we realize, and that treating people with respect isn't just morally right, it's also practically smart." Jake's phone rang, and he answered it quickly. "Hi, Dad." "Yes, I told them." "Really? Are you sure?" "Okay, I'll ask." Jake hung up and looked at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and amazement. "My dad says that Morrison Construction has been trying to get a contract to work on your new office building for the past 6 months. He says your company sent out requests for proposals, and we submitted a bid." Marcus nodded slowly. "I remember Morrison Construction. Your proposal was actually very competitive, but we went with a different company because of some concerns about your workforce diversity and sensitivity training requirements." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake and his co-workers had spent the morning attacking the very person whose approval they needed to win one of the biggest contracts in their company's history. "Oh my God," Tommy whispered. "We completely screwed ourselves." Elena looked at Marcus with curiosity. "What kind of concerns did you have about their workforce diversity?" Marcus pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through some documents. "Standard due diligence stuff. We always research potential contractors to make sure they align with our company values. Morrison Construction had a few red flags in terms of equal employment opportunity compliance and customer relations." Jake's face had gone from pale to green. "The incidents Michael mentioned earlier. Those were in our file." "Everything's in the file," Marcus confirmed. "When you're worth $50 million, you learn to be very careful about who you do business with. Your reputation becomes everything." Michael was taking notes on his phone again. "This actually creates an interesting opportunity. If Morrison Construction successfully completes the diversity training program and demonstrates real cultural change, it could potentially rehabilitate their reputation and open doors to contracts they wouldn't have qualified for otherwise." Elena smiled at her son's strategic thinking. "You're suggesting that doing the right thing might also be good for business." "I'm suggesting that reputation and character matter more in today's world than they used to. Companies can't afford to ignore discrimination and harassment anymore." Sarah had been listening to the conversation while refilling coffee cups for other customers, but she approached their table with a question. "Mr. Thompson, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Sarah. You've been coming here for months, and you've always been just normal. Nice, but normal. You never acted like you were rich or important. Why not?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because I'm not any more important than you are, or than Elena is, or than anyone else in this diner. Money doesn't make someone a better person. It just makes them a person with money." Elena nodded in agreement. "My late husband left me very comfortable financially, but I still volunteer here because this community is important to me. People are important to me. That doesn't change because of bank account balances." Jake had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort. "So you could have destroyed our company financially just by making a phone call?" "I could have," Marcus admitted. "But I didn't, and I won't." As the morning progressed, Rose's diner had transformed from a simple breakfast spot into something resembling a community meeting hall. Word of the confrontation had somehow spread, and several people had stopped by to check on what was happening. Among them was Mayor Patricia Williams, a woman in her 60s who had been governing Millbrook for the past 12 years. "Elena," the mayor called out as she entered the diner. "I got a call that there was some kind of incident here. Are you all right?" Elena stood up to greet the mayor, and Marcus noticed the easy familiarity between the two women. "I'm fine, Patricia. We had a situation with some discrimination and harassment, but Michael and I handled it." Mayor Williams looked around the diner, taking in the scene, the construction workers huddled nervously in their booth, Michael Rodriguez typing on his phone, and Marcus sitting at his table with legal documents spread out in front of him. "This looks like more than just a simple incident. It started as harassment, Elena explained, but it's evolved into an opportunity for positive change in our community. Marcus watched the exchange with interest, realizing that Elena's connections in Millbrook ran deeper than he had imagined. The mayor clearly knew her well enough to drop everything and come check on her personally. Marcus, Elena said, I'd like you to meet Mayor Patricia Williams. Patricia, this is Marcus Thompson. He owns Adaptive Solutions, the company that designed our new city website. The mayor's expression changed immediately to one of recognition and respect. Mr. Thompson, I've been hoping to meet you. Your company's work on our accessibility compliance has been outstanding. I had no idea you lived in Millbrook. I don't, actually, Marcus replied. I live about 20 minutes away, but I come here for breakfast because I like the atmosphere. Or at least, I used to. What do you mean? Mayor Williams asked, concern evident in her voice. Elena gestured toward the construction workers. These gentlemen from Morrison Construction decided that Marcus didn't belong in a public restaurant because of his disability. They also had some very interesting opinions about people who work service jobs. The mayor's expression hardened as she looked at Jake and his crew. Morrison Construction? They are currently working on 3 city projects, including the new community center. Michael looked up from his phone. That's exactly what I was just researching, Mayor Williams. It turns out that companies receiving public contracts have additional responsibilities regarding civil rights compliance. Mayor Williams pulled out her own phone and began making a call. This is the mayor. I need you to pull all current contracts with Morrison Construction and review them for civil rights compliance clauses. Yes, immediately. No, I'll explain later. Jake Morrison watched this conversation with growing horror, realizing that what had started as a cruel joke at breakfast was turning into a threat to his family's entire business. Wait, he called out desperately. Please, can we just talk about this? The mayor ended her call and walked over to where Jake was sitting. I'm listening. We made a mistake, Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. A big mistake. But Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Thompson have offered us a chance to fix it through diversity training and education. We're willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Mayor Williams looked at Elena and Marcus for confirmation. Is this true? Elena nodded. We believe in giving people opportunities to learn and grow from their mistakes. But only if they are genuinely committed to change. And, Marcus added, only if there are clear consequences for future incidents. Trust has to be earned. The mayor considered this for a moment. Mr. Morrison, I want to be very clear about something. Morrison Construction's contracts with the city are worth over $2 million annually. If your company has a pattern of discriminatory behavior, those contracts will be terminated immediately. Tommy Pierce finally found his voice. What would we need to do to keep those contracts? Mayor Williams looked at Michael, who had been quietly observing the conversation. Mr. Rodriguez, you mentioned diversity training. What exactly would that involve? Michael put away his phone and addressed the group directly. A comprehensive program addressing disability awareness, cultural sensitivity, and professional conduct. It would include initial training for all employees, regular refresher sessions, clear policies and procedures, and ongoing monitoring of compliance. How long would something like that take? The mayor asked. Implementation could begin within 2 weeks, Elena replied. But real cultural change takes time. We're talking about a 6-month intensive program with annual follow-up requirements. Jake looked at his co-workers, who nodded their agreement. We'll do it, he said firmly. Whatever it takes. Mayor Williams smiled for the first time since entering the diner. Good. Because I'm going to make this program a requirement for all city contractors going forward. Morrison Construction can be the pilot program. Marcus found himself impressed by how quickly the situation was evolving from individual accountability to systemic change. That's actually a brilliant policy decision, he said. It creates incentives for good behavior across the entire contractor community. It was Elena's idea, the mayor replied. She's been advocating for diversity requirements in city contracts for months. This revelation added yet another layer to Elena's identity. She wasn't just a volunteer cleaning lady or the mother of a successful lawyer. She was also apparently a community advocate working on policy issues at the highest levels of local government. "Elena," Marcus said, "I'm beginning to think there's a lot more to you than meets the eye." Elena laughed, the first genuinely relaxed sound she had made all morning. "My late husband used to say that everyone has depths that aren't visible on the surface. The key is taking the time to discover them." Sarah approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee and an observation. "You know, in 6 years of working here, I've never seen anything like what happened this morning. Not the harassment part, unfortunately, but the way you all turned something awful into something positive." "That's because you're witnessing something rare," Mayor Williams said. "You're seeing what happens when people choose courage over comfort and justice over convenience." Jake Morrison stood up from his booth and walked over to where Marcus and Elena were sitting. "I need to say something," he announced, his voice carrying a sincerity that hadn't been there earlier. "What I did today was wrong, and I know it. But what you've all shown me is that there's a difference between making a mistake and refusing to learn from it." He turned to Marcus directly. "Sir, I'm sorry for attacking you because of your disability. I was ignorant and cruel, and you didn't deserve that." Then, he faced Elena. "I'm sorry for disrespecting you and making assumptions about your worth based on your job. You showed more class and intelligence in 10 minutes than I've shown in years." The apology had the weight of genuine remorse behind it, and everyone in the diner could hear the difference between Jake's current words and his earlier attempts at deflection and excuse-making. Elena accepted his apology with a nod. "Thank you, Jake. Now the question is what you're going to do with this experience going forward." "I'm going to be the first person to sign up for that diversity training," Jake replied. "And I'm going to make sure everyone in our company understands that this is about more than just keeping our contracts. It's about being better people." Marcus extended his hand to Jake, who shook it firmly. "I believe people can change," Marcus said. "I've had to change myself more than once. The opportunity is there if you want to take it." Mayor Williams checked her watch. "I need to get back to City Hall, but I want to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss implementing this diversity training program for all city contractors. Elena, can you coordinate that with Michael?" "Of course," Elena replied. "We'll have a proposal ready for your review by the end of the week." As the mayor prepared to leave, she turned back to the group one more time. "You know, when I woke up this morning, I never imagined that a breakfast confrontation would lead to the most significant policy improvement our city has seen in years. Sometimes good things really do come from unexpected places." After Mayor Williams left, the diner gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The construction workers paid for their untouched breakfasts and left, promising to be in touch about the training program. Other customers resumed their conversations, though many of them continued to glance over at Marcus and Elena's table with curiosity and respect. "So," Marcus said to Elena as they found themselves alone at the table, "it turns out we both have more complicated lives than either of us realized when we woke up this morning." Elena smiled. "That's true. But you know what I'm realizing? The most important things about both of us have nothing to do with our jobs or our bank accounts. They have to do with how we treat people when it matters." "Speaking of treating people well," Marcus said, "I still owe you lunch. Somewhere nicer than this, where we can get to know each other without worrying about discrimination or harassment." "I'd like that," Elena replied. "But can I suggest something? Let's have lunch here next week. This place has been good to both of us, and, after today, I think it's going to be even better." Sarah overheard the conversation and approached with a smile. "After what happened here today, I think you two should eat free for life. You turned the worst morning I've ever had at work into something beautiful." Marcus and Elena exchanged a look, both realizing that what had started as a terrible experience had somehow become the beginning of something wonderful. They had defended each other against cruelty and ignorance, discovered unexpected connections, created opportunities for positive change in their community, and found something that neither of them had been looking for: each other. As they prepared to leave the diner, Elena had one final observation. "You know, my late husband always said that the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. I'm beginning to think he was right." Marcus smiled as he powered up his wheelchair. "Well, if the universe wanted us to meet, it certainly chose a dramatic way to make it happen." The morning sun was higher now, casting different shadows across the parking lot than it had when Marcus first arrived. But everything else had changed completely. Two people had walked into Rose's diner as strangers and were leaving as something more. A group of men had entered as bullies and left as students. A community had witnessed hatred and responded with justice tempered by mercy. And, in a small diner in Millbrook, the simple act of standing up for what was right had created ripples that would spread far beyond anyone's imagination, touching lives and changing hearts in ways that were only just beginning. As Marcus and Elena exchanged phone numbers in the parking lot, both of them understood that they had experienced something extraordinary. They had found each other not in spite of the morning's difficulties, but because of them. Sometimes the worst moments in life create the space for the best things to grow. The story of what happened at Rose's diner that morning would be told and retold throughout Millbrook for years to come. But, for Marcus and Elena, it wasn't just a story about standing up to bullies or fighting discrimination. It was the story of how they found each other, and how love sometimes arrives in the most unexpected ways, carried by the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Their lunch date the following week would be the first of many, and, within a year, there would be a small wedding ceremony in the very diner where they met. The diversity training program they helped create would become a model used by cities across the state. And Jake Morrison would become one of the program's most effective advocates, speaking to other companies about the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. But all of that was still in the future. For now, Marcus and Elena simply stood in the parking lot of Rose's diner, two people who had found something precious in the midst of something painful, ready to discover where their unexpected connection would lead them next. What matters to me is whether people learn from their mistakes and become better. The construction workers were beginning to understand that they had encountered something much rarer than wealth or power. They had met people who had both the ability to hurt them and the character not to use it destructively. But the morning's surprises weren't over yet, and the biggest revelation of all was still to come. "Why are you willing to do this?" Tommy asked. "After the way we treated you, why aren't you just trying to destroy us?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Because destroying you doesn't help the next person who might face discrimination. But training you and creating systems to prevent future incidents does help those people." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Besides, everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow. The question is whether you're willing to take that chance seriously." The construction workers looked at each other, clearly struggling with the decision. Accepting Elena's proposal would mean admitting they were wrong, committing to change their behavior, and potentially facing ongoing oversight of their company's practices. But rejecting it would mean facing the full consequences of their actions with no opportunity for redemption. As they wrestled with their choice, none of them realized that the morning's revelations were far from over, and that the biggest surprise was yet to come. Elena considered his words carefully. "You're right that people make mistakes. But what you did today wasn't a mistake. It was a choice to be cruel to people you thought couldn't fight back. The question now is whether you're going to learn from this experience or just resent getting caught." The construction workers looked at each other, clearly struggling with how to respond. Their world had been turned upside down in the span of 30 minutes, and they were beginning to understand that their problems were just beginning. As the morning sun continued to shine through the windows of Rose's diner, none of them could have predicted the events that would unfold over the next hour, events that would reveal secrets that would shock everyone in the room. Marcus watched the scene unfold with fascination. The quiet cleaning lady who had stood up for him was apparently the mother of one of the most prominent attorneys in the region. It was a reminder that appearances could be incredibly deceiving, and that everyone deserved respect regardless of their job or circumstances. "Now," Michael continued, "I think you gentlemen owe some apologies. Starting with this man in the wheelchair, who was simply trying to enjoy his breakfast in peace. The construction workers looked at each other nervously. Their morning of bullying had taken a turn they never could have anticipated, and they were beginning to realize that their actions might have consequences far beyond simply ruining someone's meal. But the story was just beginning, and none of them could have imagined the revelations that were still to come.